1 hour.
Assalamu alaikum. If sisters want to come to the main prayer hall, they can. There is a divider here for you. We'll start in a couple of minutes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
MashaAllah, this should be a private lesson, not a public presentation, but alhamdulillah, hopefully will give us a chance to get to know each other and ask any questions you want. Today, inshallah, I felt that this presentation is way overdue for this community. We have never presented a Know Your Rights presentation here in ICK, but inshallah this will be a beginning. And there are many topics, as you will see, that are included in our series of Know Your Rights presentations, and each one of them about a specific subject. Today's presentation, I will try to combine and actually condense almost 2 or 3 presentations together, because since we haven't presented something as care here, I will start by having a brief introduction, somewhat as brief as I can make it, about care in general, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and then a very brief introduction about care Kansas and why did we start the care Kansas chapter, and then talk about the basics of civil rights, and then go from the basic civil rights into the specific topic of today, which is your rights as a student, if you are a student, or a parent of a student. And I don't see any students here, so we'll see how that goes. But there are some questions in your mind, I'm sure, about the Know Your Rights subject. Now, the first thing here is, what is care? Well, simply care stands for the Council on American Islamic Relations. And as the name indicates, okay, we work on making sure the Muslim communities in America, while holding to its Islamic principles and Islamic teachings, isn't integrated into the American community and taking advantage of all the rights given to it, and is also affecting that American community as much as we can as Muslims. And we are a nonprofit organization, and as you can see, our headquarters is in Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, for those of you that don't know, it's right next to the U.S. Capitol, right street next to it. Okay, just a walking distance, a few steps away from the U.S. Capitol, we're right next to the powers that be that we need to influence. And CARE's mission, as you can see there, is very clear. CARE's mission, the vision in the beginning is to be a leading advocate for justice and mutual understanding. But the mission that we want to achieve is to, and this is a modified, our mission used to be the same but worded differently. We changed that a couple of years ago. So this is the newest mission statement for care in general. It's the mission to enhance understanding of Islam, protect civil rights, and empower Muslims, giving them as much power as you can and become effective in changing the direction of the society. How does CARE do that? What do we do to achieve it? As you can see here, the 3 pieces that are the integral parts of our mission. Okay? And we do whatever it takes to achieve this mission. whatever means we can, legal means, effective means we can, to enhance the understanding of Islam, promote justice, and empower American Muslims. And we use different things in doing that. First, CARE was started in 1994. How many of you know that CARE has been that long in existence, 30 years? Okay? And it started in the beginning with 2 or 3 people. SubhanAllah, now as you can see, in a different slide, CARE now has 37 offices spread in 29 states. Why more offices than states? Because some offices are big enough that they actually have more than one office, like California has 4 or 5, Texas has 3, Florida has 2 or 3, okay, and so on. Ohio has 2 now. In Kansas, we're a small chapter, we'll talk about this later, we only have 1 office. So anyway, when you look at this list of what CARE has achieved in those 30 years, it's quite a bit. And these numbers, some of them are old statistics that haven't been updated yet. Okay? So, we have dealt with 128,000 cases of discrimination. When you imagine that only in the last couple of months, we have handled 780 cases of discrimination. You can imagine that this 128,000 is an old number that would do a lot more than that. And we distribute a lot of what we call the guides to Islamic religious practices. The idea from this is to get the people in places that affect the Muslims to have a better understanding for what are Muslims supposed to be practicing and how do I, as a person in power, give them the rights to do what they need to do. And those guides cover pretty much everything. We have an educator's guide for Islamic religious practices. We have an employer's guide for Islamic religious practices. We have law enforcement guide to Islamic religious practices. We have correctional institutions guide for Islamic religious practices. And so on and so on and so on. And we have a list. In the back table there's a list of all the publications that we usually have. And these publications, it's not a listed display. And they're all for display only 1 copy of each, so please do not take them. But in the corner back there is a little folded handout that says CARE and you. Feel free to take as many copies from that as you want. And there is a small card, folded thing, also about know your rights. And you can take that if you want also. Okay? Now, we have been giving seminars and workshops and presentations like this about civil rights all over the country. And we have been encouraging people because you can't really protect your civil rights unless you know what your rights are. So we are actively encouraging Muslims from all different kinds, in different places to get to know. So we encourage school students and university students. And we've been working with MSAs to know your rights as a student. What is the obligation of your university for you? What your obligation is your school to you, and so on. Know your rights as an employee. What are the obligations of your workplace to you, and so on. So we have been doing thousands of those presentations and trained a lot of people. And this Quran, you will see the distribution of the Quran. How many of you know the copy of the Quran that CARE distributes? You will see a picture of it coming soon. CARE actually has this project where they would like, they can or they will provide a copy, you have a copy of it here, a copy of the Quran to any non-Muslim that asks for a copy of it. This is the copy, you got this from CARE. And they will send this copy of this Quran to anyone that asks for it. And they give it to them for free. year, we issue what we call a civil rights report or Islamophobia report. And there are copies of pretty much every year since 2013 until now, that from those where we outline the statistics that we have on civil rights violations for Muslims and discrimination against Muslim cases that we accepted and we processed in court or in any processes. And then we talk about the changes that need to happen and the changes that happen and so forth. And every year the report is a little different, and you'll see some pictures, and you can see in the back that displayed there all the copies that we have had. Okay? As you all know, CARE puts a lot of emphasis on the role of the media in changing the American people's mind. So we're very actively involved with the media, and we have been, alhamdulillah, we have been very effective in accessing the media and using the media to change people's mind and sometimes to apply pressure on people of power. As you can see here, there are some pictures of the publications that CARE has been issuing. This one here, it's on the table there, and many of them are on the table. The Same Hate, New Target. This was the first Islamophobia report that we created, civil rights report, talking about how in American history there was always somebody discriminated against. Started against the Polish people, started against Catholics, and started against Jewish people. And now it's the turn for the Muslim people. And that's why it was called, it's the same hate, the same old hate that was always directed at a minority somewhere, but it's new target, the new target for it is Muslims. And there are so many others in there. We have the mosque report that talks about all the mosques in the US, what their conditions are, who they are, and where they come from, and so forth. And again, this is a list of publications that you can access all that. Some of the older ones you may not be able to get. But any of those publications, every year, if you call CARE, they will send you a copy for free. This report here, remember the one that said, Same Hate, New Target? That is the Islamophobia report or the Civil Rights report. This is the newest one for 2022, as you can see in there. It was just issued a couple of months ago, but it collects the data for the last year, 2022. And it says, Progress in the Shadow of Prejudice, talking about how much progress we as Muslims have achieved, even though we are still working under a considerable amount of prejudice and discrimination from the society around us. Journalist Guide to Islam. And another part of emphasizing the power that Muslim can have is also encouraging people to register to vote and getting them actually involved in voting. And every state, every chapter, they try their best to have a get out the vote effect or impact, and we actually operate a phone operation in a couple of days before the election to make sure that people go and vote. We have to say here that just like the masjid, just like the Islamic Center, we are a non-profit organization, 501c3, and as such, we cannot be involved in prohibited political activity, and we have to really clarify what that means. It means we cannot neither support a party or a candidate or oppose a party or a candidate. But we can actually say what we want and support a certain policy, a certain issue. If we are for this issue, we can do whatever we want to promote this issue. If we're against this issue, we can do whatever we want against this issue, discourage it. So we can participate in the political process. The only prohibition is we cannot neither promote or push or actively support neither a candidate, a specific candidate, or a specific party, or work against a specific candidate or a specific party. So if you disagree with a candidate, you talk about the issues that you disagree with him or her about, but you cannot tell the people, we don't like this guy and we want you to elect him. Okay? And we issue an election guide every single year. And one of the election guides, one of the things we do, for example, if you have a congressperson here, congressman or congresswoman, we get you the record from the first day they were in office, how they voted in every specific issue. Did they vote against the things that we like or for them? Okay. Did they vote for the things that we dislike or against them? So that gives you an idea what they actually do in office, so it can help you decide if you want to vote for them again or not. These are a couple of the guides. This is the Educator's Guide to Islamic Religious Practice that I was telling you about. And this is the cover, the newest cover of the newest version that we have. The version keeps changes. Immigration, detention, and removal. A guide for detainees and families. Again, this has been an issue in the last few years. So we created a guide for families that have issues with immigration and harassment for their people and having difficulties with it. So we have a guide for them. Same idea, and showing some annual reports and guides and stuff like that. The department that used to issue these civil rights report and Islamophobia report, we used to call it the Islamophobia department within CARE. And then we decided people don't like that having a department called Islamophobia was not right. So now, just in case if you see the name change, that department now is referred to as the Research and Advocacy Department. Okay, it's actually, the acronym for it as RAD. We're not RAD, we're not radicals. This is Research and Advocacy Department. And this is the Quran project, and here is the picture of the Quran that I was telling you about. The goal is to distribute at least 1 million copies of this Quran. Okay? And we have reached so far close to half of that goal. But we will continue doing it, inshallah, until we reach the 1 million or more. And we are getting feedback from people that receive it, that they value it and they learn from it, and sometimes some of them, alhamdulillah, become Muslims, or at least become closely understanding and supportive of Muslims after they learn that. Okay, we talked about how many officers we have. Our goal is to have a presence in every state. Right now, we only exist in 37 states. In 29 states, 37 offices in 29 states. But we're working very, very, very strongly in creating a chapter in every state that doesn't have one. And sometimes we lose chapters. For example, Iowa used to have a chapter. Iowa existed before Care, Kansas, but for some strange reason, not strange, they had some issues, and they closed the office in Iowa. Okay? Nebraska doesn't have one. Guess what? When someone in Nebraska has a problem with discrimination against Muslims, or someone in Iowa, guess who they call? They call Care, Kansas, because we're the closest to them, we're the nearest to them. And I actually was dealing with people from Nebraska yesterday, asking for help and some help and support. All right, we want a media training center. We actually, before I even joined CARE, at that time I was in the Islamic Center of Lawrence. Before I became the head of the Islamic Center of Lawrence, we invited CARE to Lawrence, and they came and did a little fundraising. But they gave us a 3-day workshop for anyone that wants to join it on how to deal with the media. And until today, after all these 20-some years, this is the best training I personally received on how to deal with the media. And alhamdulillah, has been effective, helping me in my work with the Islamic Center, and afterwards, and now when I'm helping CARE. Okay. And again, we can provide this training for any Islamic Center or any group that wants it, how to deal with the media effectively. CARE wants to create a CARE TV channel. I don't know, at least this was one of the goals. I don't know if this is something that TV channels are closing nowadays and everything is going online. And CARE now has their own channel on YouTube, and they use a lot of video and stuff like that. But the idea is to have something that represents the Muslim point of view on the media with a strong presence. Okay? Increased number of legal staff. Well, you can imagine why that is. In order to be able to effectively defend and do the legal work for the Muslim community, we need as many legal staff members as we can. CARE Kansas doesn't have any employed lawyers yet, although we did an effort a couple of years ago to do that, and we did some fundraising, but for a number of different reasons we haven't been successful doing that. First, because we didn't get good candidates, we didn't have enough money to support. But we'll continue doing, inshallah, until we get there. As you saw before, we have been very effective, and we have many offices have a lot of lawyers working for them. The national office has at least 10 attorneys, experienced attorneys, working for them as employees. Okay, Florida and California and Chicago and all these places have lawyers working for them. The total, we have combined number of over 50 attorneys working for the organization in different states. Okay, and they are willing to jump on a moment's notice, and they have been very successful. There are several cases that CARE started that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and several state Supreme Courts, and we can talk about some of these cases if the issue arose. And some of them you may have heard about them already. Oh, it's important to look at here. We know how movies and TV and things affect the people's mind and how they think. So CARE, one of our goals is at some point we have a specialized office, to have a specialized office based in Hollywood in order to have the connection to the people that make the movies and make the TV series and all the stuff and influence how they do it and how they project Muslims in those movies. Okay? The last one is talking about a waqf or trust to finance and generate revenue for CARE. And alhamdulillah, our national office is very close to doing that. Okay? We're working very closely on it, and at least we will take the burden of them putting as much time and effort into fundraising in order to support all the employees and the lawyers and the publications and all that stuff. This waqf, inshallah, will help alleviate some of that. Now, we get to CARE Kansas. Why would you need a CARE chapter in Kansas? Can anyone guess? Well, because Kansas was not different from the rest of the states. Sometimes they were worse and sometimes they were better. But the same issues where people will have somehow they pick on a certain group of minority or underprivileged people and they become a target of hate and target of discrimination. And Kansas was not an exception, and Muslims just happened to be the new target. How did this show up? Well, here are some issues. These pictures, by the way, were pictures of things that actually happened in Kansas before CARE Kansas started. Signs saying no Muslims allowed at the door of a store. Okay. Caution, Muslim employees ahead. Warning people, careful. You don't go to this place because there are some Muslim people working there. All these kind of statements that were blatant discrimination against Muslims, and we needed to fight it. How many of you know how many states have anti-Sharia law? No one knows. Do you know what's the first state that put an anti-Sharia law on their books? No one knows. Interesting. The first state to ever try passing an anti-Sharia law or something anti-Sharia, it was Oklahoma. And they didn't pass just a law. They actually did an amendment to the state constitution to put the anti-Sharia statement in the Constitution, and it passed by 75% approval. As soon as it passed, Cairo, Oklahoma filed a lawsuit against it and went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that this is a violation of the Constitution because it's speaking on one particular religion and the people that practice that religion. And it was invalidated. Guess what? What was the first state that was able to pass an anti-Sharia law successfully and not being removed?
Texas.
Texas? Texas? Any guess, sisters? Believe it or not, guys, it was our beloved state of Kansas. Kansas was the very first state to successfully pass an anti-Sharia law. And this happened in 2013. Anyone knows when Kansas was formed? December 2013. At that time, I was living in Lawrence, but I was working in St. Louis. And during that time, Florida and Missouri wanted to pass an anti-Sharia law. And I happened to get information from CARE, and I was participating in the fight against both states passing anti-Sharia law. And successfully stopped it from passing in Florida and Missouri. As we were celebrating our victory in stopping it, guess what? We got the news that Kansas passed it without anyone hearing anything about it. You will ask, why didn't we go to court and turn it over, like Oklahoma did? Because the Kansas legislature was very, very smart when they did that. When they passed the law in Kansas, while they were deliberating in there, they didn't name the law anti-Sharia law. They named it anti-foreign law. Because the Supreme Court said, you are picking, when you say anti-Sharia law, you are picking one particular religion. So they said, we're not stopping the religion, we're not referring to one religion. We're saying anti-foreign law. Okay? The document says that any document presented in court that makes reference to any law other than the US law will be invalidated and the court cannot accept it. So in reality, if you submit any document that makes reference to Sharia, they will reject it because it's a foreign law. It's not part of the US law. But this way they avoided the Supreme Court saying you are making reference to Sharia. But during the deliberation in the Kansas Capitol, in the House and the Senate, people on the floor, and they were recorded saying that you know what we mean by this. It's called anti-foreign law, but what we mean is stop Sharia law from being anywhere in any document in the US. Okay? And they celebrated when it passed and no one could touch it. Once we heard about this, the question was, had we had someone keeping an eye on the Capitol on what laws are being passed, maybe we would have been able to stop it just like we did in the other states. Okay? But because we didn't have a CARE chapter in Kansas, we couldn't do that. And that's when we decided to start a CARE chapter in Kansas. That's how we started. So,
can we ask questions now, or should we wait till the end?
I'm sorry?
Can we ask questions now?
Sure.
So, could you give us an example of where, for example, the law, the Islamic law, could actually contradict with the American law?
Well, we're not saying contradict or not. What they are saying is it has nothing to do with contradiction, but if you have a document, for example, I'll give you a clear example. If somebody has a will for how their inheritance should be distributed after their death, okay? And said, in the will says, I want whatever inheritance I leave behind to be distributed according to Sharia law. Guess what? This will not be accepted by court because it makes reference to the Sharia law. And in that case, the court will decide to distribute the inheritance any way the court decides, not according to your wish.
Unless we write it, unless we break it down.
Correct, unless you say, I want this person to get this much, this person to get this much. But as you know, and I know, that the will is difficult, because when you write the will, things can happen, can change the next day. The person can die before you do, or you have another child born and stuff like this. So you cannot really write all these details in the will, and knowing that it's going to be there valid. And that's why there are other different ways to do it now. But to put it in a standard will, it will be in depth. And we are still, by the way, trying to find a way to reverse this anti-Sharia law in Kansas. But we got, as soon as we formed Kansas chapter, we got pulled by more urgent issues. And this, what you're seeing here, it talks about the officer training program debate. This was the first issue that happened before we even made the full announcement that Care Kansas was created. We found out that the sheriff in Wichita is bringing someone to train his deputies and extending invitation to every police officer in the whole state of Kansas to come and attend the training. And this training was done by this well-known Islamophobe that was known all over the country. And he gives this training, for you to know this guy, he's a former FBI agent that was actually fired from the FBI for misconduct. Okay? And he created this company or this organization that is named Understanding the Threat. And his presentation, the training program that he gives to the officers, is also named Understanding the Threat. And he goes to give this training all over the country, and in the training, he tells the people that every Muslim is a potential terrorist, every Islamic center is a training center for terrorists, and you do not trust what a Muslim tells you because the religion teaches him to lie to you, okay? And you cannot have a Muslim as a partner in anything. So as soon as we heard about this, we jumped into action. We put all our resources into fighting this guy, and you have to understand, this guy was giving these courses everywhere in the country, and no one could stop him. Even in Washington, D.C., where our national office is, this guy was doing his training on the campus of the George Washington University. And our office in Washington, the main office, tried to fight it. The most they could do is convince the university administration to tell them, you cannot have it in a facility by university. So they went and did the training outside, in another location outside the university. No one was able to do anything about it. SubhanAllah, we jumped in and we called on the sheriff to have a meeting with us to discuss this. He refused. We wanted to have him at least a phone call. He refused. We went to the media and we issued a press release denouncing them doing this and using our tax money to train the officers to hate Muslims and treat them badly. Because the county was paying this guy $700 for every police officer that attends. A lot of money. And this is taxpayers' money, our tax money, to train officers to treat us badly. So we organized a campaign to send letters and emails to the county government. Okay, and we continued this, and at the end, the pressure was very high, and by the way, we got on the phone with every county sheriff all over the state of Kansas. And we got every single one of them to tell us that we will not send any officer to this training. So it was only concentrated in Wichita. And then one day, after all this pressure from the government officials, and county officials in Wichita, we got a message from the one police officer in Wichita who is a Muslim, telling us that the sheriff is feeling the pressure and he's trying to find a face-saving way to get out of this. Can you find a way to help him? And he is making a proposal. What is the proposal? He said, what if, instead of this training to be sponsored by the county sheriff, they were sponsored by a private group? Would that be okay? And I said, absolutely not. If he is going to send any of his officers to that training and pay for it, it's unacceptable. Even if the officer take time off on his own vacation and pays out of his pocket to go for this training, if he is going to give this officer credit for the hours he spent in the training as part of his required hours of training every year, credit as a police officer, he has to get a certain number of hours. If he accepts that training as one of those hours or some of those hours, then it's unacceptable. And then we reached to the state's attorney, who covers both Kansas and Missouri at the time. This was the time of Obama. And he reached to the county sheriff and told him, listen, this kind of training that you're doing is the wrong training, and you shouldn't do it. And if you cancel it, we will provide you training by the real FBI experts at no charge. The training was supposed to take place on a Tuesday. And we have already organized people to have demonstrations in front of the place where they're going to have the training and disrupt the whole thing. And we gave them until Friday. If they don't do something about it, we're going to be there. On Friday afternoon, before the deadline, the county sheriff went on TV and said this issue became too controversial and distracting us from our work, and we found a better source for the training, so we're canceling the training. And this was the very first time this guy's training was canceled anywhere in the US. And our brand new chapter in Kansas was able to be the first one to cancel the training from this guy who was livid when he came on TV afterwards. And he was saying, we have given this course everywhere in the country, we have never been cancelled before, and all that stuff, but alhamdulillah, we're able to. So, this was the beginning, this is the first thing we did. After that, we did a lot of things, alhamdulillah, over the first year that we did. In many cases, many of them clear cases of discrimination. How much time do we still have?
20 minutes.
20 minutes? Try to do it. Now we're going to talk about know your rights. Okay? What are our rights? What do you need to know about our rights? Well, again, we covered this number of topics I mentioned to you before. We talk civil rights at home or work, dealing with law enforcement, when you travel, if they get stopped by the police or somebody in the airport or in your car or whatever, how to deal with them. Know your rights as a student, know your rights as an employee, know your rights as a victim of hate crime, and know your rights while protesting. All these are different. Each one of these has a separate presentation that we give on how to know your rights, what are your rights, and how to protect them. Now, let's start with the rights. Civil rights basics. What do we need to know? What are civil rights? Okay? Oh. See how colorblind I am? The color doesn't even show. You can't even see this, right? Civil rights are the rights. Oh, that's better. Thank you. No. Okay. Civil rights mean it's your right to be treated like anybody else. They cannot treat you differently from they treat other people. Okay? So what does discrimination mean? Discrimination means that if they start treating you unfairly, different from other people with no reason. If they have a reason, that's okay. But if they don't have a reason, then that becomes a discrimination. Alright? And then, who gives us these civil rights? Where do they come from? Is it just because the president likes us and gives us civil rights, or likes the people, or somebody? No. The civil rights in America come from the US Constitution. That's why in 2016, when there's a celebration here, I think it was Martin Luther King's Day, when people talking about how we are threatened by the election of a new president or a new Congress, and I told them no. Our rights do not come from the president or the Congress. Our rights come from the Constitution. The Constitution is still the same and hasn't been changed because we got a new president or a new Congress. And if the president or the Congress dare to touch our civil rights by issuing a new policy or a new practice that violates our rights, I only have one word for them: see you in court. And that's what happened, if you remember, with the Muslim ban. King was one of the first people to jump in court and file law cases, and we were able to reverse it once, twice, and 3 times until finally got modified. In addition to the US Constitution, there are federal laws and state laws that also enhance civil rights. Now, the Constitution, one part of the Constitution does this. The Constitution, as you know, it's still rules and mandates and all the stuff that function as the source of all laws in the US. You heard the word Bill of Rights before. What does it mean? Anyone knows? Well, interesting. The Bill of Rights is actually the first 10 amendments to the US Constitution. And they establish the basic standards of treatment and limits of the government. They limit what the government can do and what cannot do. Now, we always hear about the First Amendment. What is that about?
Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech.
Only?
Presentation.
He said freedom of speech. That is part of it, but it's not all of it.
Yeah.
First Amendment guarantees the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. Okay? And there is something in the First Amendment in the Constitution that talks about what they call the Establishment Clause. Lawyers here know what that is, right? The idea is the government does not have the right to establish a religion for people or prohibit a particular religion from being practiced. So they cannot tell you what religion to practice. They cannot induce you or promote a religion as if this is the state religion. Okay? The government has no religion and has no right to establish a religion. And anything that they do, and this doesn't apply to the federal government or the government, it actually applies to any governmental institutions, meaning a school, a public school that's run by the government, cannot tell the students, let's come and pray this kind of prayer, a Christian prayer or a Jewish prayer or a Buddhist prayer or whatever it is. They cannot do that. They cannot lead the students or give them an impression that they encourage them to do a specific form of religion, because that would be establishing a religion for the state, and that's against the Constitution. Okay? So, it's important to notice when we're talking about the freedom of speech, right, that the government cannot generally regulate the content of speech. It cannot tell you what to talk about and what not to talk about. But also that freedom is not absolute. Okay? It has limits and it can regulate when and how. Okay? And to some extent, it can have some limits on the content. I'll explain that in a second. The Fourth Amendment is something different. It's part again of the Bill of Rights. It guarantees the right to be free from unreasonable search. Underline the word unreasonable. No police officer can stop you just because you look like a Muslim, you have a beard, or you're wearing a hijab, and say, I want to search your car. Unless they have a good reason. Okay? Then you don't have to allow them. They come to your home and they want to search your home. Unless they have a warrant, a court order, they don't have the right to search your home. And the court will not issue a warrant for them to do that unless they have reasonable cause. Okay, so this is a protection for us against unreasonable search. Unless they have a good reason, they cannot search our property or our homes or ourselves. And by the way, if they search you and find something that they find incriminating and they take you to court, and you say in court that never had a permission to do this, the court will throw this evidence and the whole case will be cancelled. Because the court will not accept evidence based on illegal action, which is the unreasonable search.
And we have the right not to open the doors, right? Like if somebody knocks on our door, we have the right.
You have. We'll talk about this in a minute. But the idea, and remember, we have a whole session, a whole presentation about how to deal with law enforcement. And you are correct. You don't have to talk to them at all. Okay? No obligation to talk. You have the constitutional right to refuse to talk to them. And if they want to talk to you, they have to talk to you through a lawyer. You have to have a lawyer with you. And we always advise, never talk to the police or the FBI without having a lawyer next to you. By the way, I didn't say this in the beginning, but I have to say it now. I am not an attorney. And even if I was an attorney, none of this is a legal advice. This is only for knowledge. But do not take this as a legal advice. Okay? We all know about the Civil Rights Act and the different things, equal opportunity employment and all the stuff. We'll skip through this. We talked about the general civil rights. Any questions about the civil rights before we go into the specific about schools and students? No questions? Okay.
I have a comment. So
Yes.
I went to the local PDs and they said that if they have reasonable cause, like they smell marijuana or something, that they don't have to get your permission to search your vehicle.
I'm sorry, say it again.
So in cases where they pull you over for a traffic violation,
Uh-huh.
and then they feel that you may have contraband, so they can do a search without a warrant.
If they have a reason,
Yeah.
if they have a valid reason to suspect that you have contraband, then that gives them the right reason. But if there is no reason to give them that, they have to prove to the court what gave them the idea that there is contraband.
Correct.
Okay? And if they don't have that, if they can't prove it, then it's not valid. See what I'm saying? Okay. So now, we'll talk about know your rights as a student. Okay? And since there aren't anyone here is a student? Almost. Okay. So we're going to try to go through this as quickly as we can. Okay? As we mentioned earlier, your rights come from the First Amendment. Okay? And the First Amendment protects your rights as a person in the environment to be treated equally as anybody else. Now, as a student in a public school or public university, what do we want to do? First, you are there for the whole day and we're obligated to pray 5 times a day. Do you have the right to pray in a public school or a university? Yes, you do. Why? Because if they prevent you from praying, then they are violating your right to practice your religion, and that will be a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Now, all what you have to do is when you ask as a student or a parent of a student that the student can be given a couple of minutes or a few minutes to pray when it's time to pray, okay, they can do that. And they have to be obligated to do it. With some caveats, okay? All what you have to do is just give you a time and give you a space. But they can't be involved in the prayer. You don't have a teacher standing with you and doing that stuff. You can't, okay? All you have to do as a parent is to let the institution, the teacher, the principal, know that your son or daughter needs to do this, and they're going to need to be excused for the 5 minutes, and as long as they can do it in between classes, or at a time when it doesn't interrupt the class, okay, then they cannot say no. And you ask for them to give them to designate for them what space where they can pray. Doesn't have to be in the middle of the classroom, in the middle of the class, but you can go in this area here, in this office, or in this corridor, or whatever, or if there is a chapel in the school or something, then you can go and pray there. Okay, so that's the first right. What about wudu? They have the right to perform wudu. No one can tell them, no, you can't wash your feet in the sink. If you don't want them to wash their feet in the sink, you have to provide another means for them to wash their feet and wear safely for them and for others. But they have the right to do that, whether it's in the locker room or in the bathroom or wherever. Now, are people allowed to wear whatever religious attire they need to? Sisters wearing the hijab, or if someone wears something else that the religion tells them to do they have to do it? What if it's a violation of the dress code? The dress code does not override your religious rights. Okay? So they have to provide accommodation within the dress code to allow you to practice your religion. For example, if the dress code doesn't allow any head cover, then the dress code needs to say no head covers are allowed except for religious attire that's declared and requested. The case about the hijab, by the way, which established the right of women to wear the hijab anywhere in the US, was started by CARE in Maryland when a Muslim employee was working on the front desk of the Marriott Hotel. And the manager told her to take her hijab off, and she refused. And told her this is a clear violation of the dress code. And she refused, so they fired her. So CARE filed a lawsuit against Marriott, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they won. And since then, it became a landmark case that no one can force a Muslim woman to take her hijab off just because of the dress code. Your dress code, if it contains something that prevents a woman from wearing a hijab, then your dress code is violating the Constitution and has to be changed. And this goes on and on for many things. Now, what about holidays? What about if Eid comes on a school day and your child feels, if I stay home to celebrate Eid, I'm going to miss an exam or I miss something important? We cannot force the school to give everybody in the school a day off just because it's Eid. Although some schools do it based on what percentage of students are Muslim and requiring that. And the rule of thumb, by the way, if a school has 30% or more of their students to be observing this holiday, they usually make it an official holiday of the school because they don't want 30% of the students absent on that day and continue the school with normal. But if you only have a handful of students in there who are Muslim, then the obligation here is, first of all, do not schedule anything important on the day of the Eid. So if the student takes the day off to spend with their family and celebrating the religious holiday, then they are not missing an exam, or they are not missing an important lesson or stuff like that. Do not give a homework that's due on that day and you have to return it on that day. Because if that student cannot return on that day, what are you going to do? Fail them? So you give them accommodation. For you, I will make the day after, and it's not going to affect your grade. Or we will change the due date to be the day after for everybody, so this way you're not different from anybody else. Okay, and so on. So they have to provide, and the Constitution always refers to reasonable religious accommodation. The word reasonable here is very important. And if we have time, I can give you an example for that later on. Okay? What about Ramadan? Ramadan, if you have a little child that goes to school, at lunchtime, their friends will be eating and all the stuff, and they are sitting isolated. Okay? But if you let the school know in advance, they will make sure that that child doesn't have to be in the same place, they have another place to be at, other than the cafeteria or other than the classroom, if they eat in the classroom. They don't have to be there. They provide them a different opportunity to be somewhere where they are fasting and they are not being harassed by others. Okay? What about the things that take place in the classroom? Sometimes, if an event like what is happening in the last couple of weeks and Islam is in the news, some people can turn and start asking the student, what is happening with your Muslim people? Can you explain to us what's going on? That is unacceptable, because you can't expect a child to be blamed or put in a position to defend the whole community. It's not their role and it's not their ability. Okay? That's unacceptable. You can't expect them to be the spokesperson for religion at that age. So you cannot do that. Now, also, you cannot have school material that conflict with their religious values and religious teachings. And this is an issue that has been in the news quite a bit and a lot of people's mind. And I will talk to you about this in a second. Okay? And if they are discussing something, and in the middle of the subject they are discussing, they are mentioning religious views about that subject, they need to include the Muslim point of view on that subject and be acceptable if the student brings it up.
Is there a reason why you have that? That's a movie, right? That's a movie poster right there.
Correct.
Is there a reason why you put it on there? Because I have watched that movie at ICK.
Right, and because this was an example of an issue that was controversial, and it talks about certain people, because as you know, this is talking about, has a reference to the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Okay? And then, when you ask a student, how do you explain this? This movie talks about the story of a girl growing up as a girl in Iran after the Islamic Revolution. And when they ask another girl or another boy to try to explain what's happening here, then they are putting them on the spot for something that they can't be a spokesperson for the whole religion. Right?
But that movie was still allowed, or is still allowed at school, for example, or is there anything that would not allow it, or? No,
you cannot stop it completely, but at least you cannot put it in a way that intentionally putting a religion down. Okay?
So on that second point, if you can just in the previous slide, on that second point regarding the material that conflicts with the beliefs and the religious beliefs of the student.
Right.
What if the school does that? What action?
We'll get to this in a second.
Okay.
And I know the subject in everybody's mind right now is the LGBTQ and all this stuff, right? And that's definitely something in there. Freedom of speech, as we said before, the student, just like anybody else, must, because your students, you don't leave your civil rights at the door of the school when you enter. You still have your civil rights inside the school. You still have, if somebody is a jail inmate, they still have their civil rights inside the jail. You don't leave it outside. Okay? So their rights are protected no matter where they are. So they can talk about any subject on your mind, and no one can tell them you cannot talk about that. Okay? As long as it's something in the middle of a normal discussion for everyone expressing their rights or their opinions. Okay? You can talk about politics, religion, or socially important issues or controversial topics. You can do that. Now, as we said before, the freedom of speech means that no one can force you to say something against your will or not to say something that you want to do with some restrictions. Okay? Right to assemble and address grievances. Of course, you have the right to assemble, get people in groups, as long as it doesn't have to be on school time or school property. So if you want to create an MSA in your high school, you can. As long as it's not in school time, you're not meeting in school time, or you're demanding a school property. You can have the meeting outside, or you can have the meeting in a separate room that is available for any student to make a reservation for it. Okay?